I actually got into crime writing by accident. When I quit TV in the mid-90s, it was to make a living as a novelist. I had no idea really what kind of genre I was going to write in. I was just going to write stories. And of course, as a young man, I had grown up on the great novels of the 20th century, and I suppose I had always wanted to be the great novelist. The first story that I came to write when I would quit television was a story set in China involving genetic engineering of food. It was a big story. It was something close to my heart. My problem was how to tell that story. And so I really worked very hard to try and find a way of being able to deliver the tale to my readers. And in the end, I decided that the best way to do it was by starting with a crime, the discovery of a body in a park in Beijing, and through that investigation, creating a police officer and a pathologist in the process, I would be able to unravel the story that I wanted to tell. So effectively that's what happened, and at the end I had written a crime book. And once you've written a crime book, of course your publisher wants you to continue writing crime books, and your readers want you to continue writing crime books, so you're kind of stuck in a genre, if you like. It's a genre I like, but that's the way it happened. I first wrote The Black House, which is nearly 10 years ago now, and I thought it was the best thing I'd ever written. It was roundly rejected by every publishing house in Britain. I was devastated at the time because, it was my baby. I really did believe it was the best thing I'd written. I couldn't understand why no one wanted to publish it. And it was really about 3 years later that I had told my French publisher that I had this unpublished manuscript that I thought was the best thing I'd ever written, and she said she wanted to read it. So she read it. 6 weeks afterwards, she phoned me and said, "I love it. I want to buy world rights." They did. They translated it into French. It was published in France. Huge success. It was taken to the big international book fair at Frankfurt, where everybody bought it all over Europe, and eventually, of course, in the United Kingdom, where it has since become a major bestseller. In fact, the trilogy has now sold more than 1 million copies just here. Why did the French take to it when the British didn't? Well, the French have a genre of book called the roman noir, literally the black novel. They were more inclined to regard serious crime writing as literature. And I think The Black House fell into that category. And since there was a kind of history of reading that kind of book in France, then it really took off there, and the French enjoyed it. It took, I think, in the UK, the invasion of Scandinavian crime writers to popularise the genre of the serious crime novel, where stories were dark, psychological tales set in cold northern places, which really describes the Black House acutely. So I think that would be a reasonable explanation of why the French took to it. Oddly enough, I've actually never seen Top of the Lake, although it has been brought to my attention by people who have remarked on the similarity in tone and quality between that television series and my trilogy of books set in the Hebrides. But one day I'll maybe get around to seeing it. I would quite enjoy that, I think. The truth is, I actually never write about a place that I haven't been to. Research is a very important element of my writing process. I take 4 to 5 months to develop and research an idea. And a lot of that idea and development comes out of the research. I do a lot of research reading. And when I get the story developed to a certain point where I'm able to write a fairly detailed synopsis of it, I then go and visit the locations that are going to appear in the book. And that in turn informs the story in itself and changes it and adapts it, and gives it perhaps that sense of place and atmosphere that I am so keen to pursue in my writing. It's true that I've had a very varied career as a writer, starting as a journalist and then a screenwriter and a producer, before I finally was able to make my living writing books. But that's what I always actually wanted to do. But when you're young, when you're coming out of school, there's no career path to become a novelist. And certainly when I was leaving school, there were no courses at university in creative writing. So I had to find some way of making a living as a writer because that's what I wanted to do. And that led me into journalism, which in turn led me into television. And it was only 20 years later that I took the leap and abandoned all that and set out to make a living as a novelist. But it's what I always wanted to do. Actually, with neither the Lewis trilogy nor the China thrillers did I set out to write a series. In both cases, I wrote a one-off book. In the case of the China series, The Firemaker was supposed to be a standalone book, and it was only because when a publisher offered to buy it, that offer came attached with a two-book contract. And that two-book contract was dependent upon me writing another book with the same characters in the same place. So one book became two, and ultimately it became six. Similarly, with the Lewis trilogy, The Black House was only ever supposed to be a standalone book. But ultimately, when both my French and UK publishers bought the rights, they were very keen that I turn it into a series. I refused actually the offer to turn it into a series because the murder rate on the Isle of Lewis, where the book's set, is only one a century, so it doesn't really provide very fruitful territory for a crime series. In the end, we arrived at a compromise, and I decided, or I agreed to write a trilogy. 3 books was more than enough, I think. So I never set out to write series. I only ever really have a standalone idea in my head. Actually, I don't think there is any way that I can now go back and add to the series that I have previously written. The China series is finished. The Lewis trilogy is over. The Enzo Files is not quite finished. There is one book remaining to be written in that series. It's just a question of finding the time to do it. Every prize that I've received for any of my books is greatly valued. I suppose the first that I ever received, which was an award given by prisoners in French penitentiaries. My book was one of a short list of 6, which was read by panels of prisoners in these penitentiaries in France, and they chose my book as the winner. The prize was called the Prix Intramuros, and that was the first prize any of my books had ever won, so obviously that was a very important one. Most of my other awards have also been in France. I suppose in some senses the award that I won last year in the United States, which was an award for the Crime Book of the Year, which was the Barry Award, which was given by the readers of a magazine, a mystery magazine in America. That was very important to me because it was the first time that any of my books had won an award in the language in which they'd been written. So that was a very important one as well. I've always enjoyed technology. I suppose I am what would be called an early adopter. I got my first computer, I think, around about 1980. It was an Apple II, very early Apple computer. I saw immediately the potential for technology to become an aid to writing, not just in the writing process, but ultimately in the research. And so it proved with the advent of the internet, which has totally revolutionised a writer's ability to research a subject. So yes, I love technology. I'm sitting here now. I'm surrounded by. I have 3 screens that I work with. I have 2 mobile phones. I have iPads, and all of which I use mostly in the pursuit of my writing and my research. So yes, I love that. Of course, I also come from a television background, and was a producer, a writer and a producer of television for many years, and so I'm very comfortable with that technology of video and editing. The Gaelic language TV series, which I created and produced, was something I'd been commissioned to do by Scottish television. I don't speak the Gaelic language. I had never been to the Outer Hebrides before that commission came, and so it was a voyage of discovery for me, about a part of Scotland that I didn't know, about the history and culture of the Gaelic language. And I got deeply involved in that and embroiled in it, and became very much a part of the movement to protect and preserve that language and culture for future generations. So that was very much the driving force behind the television series Macha. And of course, it was my experiences during the filming of Macha, 5-6 years that I spent living on the islands 5 months a year, that I gathered all the kind of background information and intelligence that was required to be able to write the Lewis trilogy. And I wouldn't say that I had any particular goal in mind in writing those books, except to somehow express my reader's relationship to the human condition. Right now, I'm working on the follow-up to my best-selling book, Entry Island. Entry Island in itself was a follow-up to the Lewis trilogy, and although it was quite different from the trilogy, it still referred back to the islands. Part of the story had a historical setting there. The other part of it, the contemporary element of the book, was set in Canada. But with this new book, I'm following a completely different line. There are no islands in sight. It's a completely landlocked story that takes place between Glasgow, the city where I was born, and London, the city I ran away to when I was 17 years old. And much of the story is based around that episode in my life when I did run away from Glasgow to London. It's an interesting tale.